And there she stands, the shameless, cold-blooded thief who quietly bled my late husband's empire dry, stealing the very corporate crown jewel meant for my beautiful daughter. The sharp, agonizing screech of the microphone cut through the velvet jazz music and the light-hearted laughter of 100 elite guests inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Heights Hotel. The sudden, violent silence that followed was suffocating, instantly halting the rhythmic clinking of $1,000 crystal champagne flutes and the low, wealthy murmur of high society. My stepmother, Evelyn Sterling, stood atop the sweeping white marble staircase, a wireless microphone clutched tightly in her black-gloved hand as her face contorted into a mask of theatrical, venomous grief. She wore a dramatic, blood-red gown that clashed violently with the pristine white floral arrangements surrounding the ballroom stage, her diamond necklace catching the cold glare of the overhead chandeliers. Beside her stood her 26-year-old biological daughter, Tiffany, looking every bit the fragile, wronged princess as she squeezed out a pair of perfectly timed, artificial tears into a silk handkerchief. 100 pairs of eyes, including city senators, billionaire venture capitalists, and the entire board of directors of Sterling Global Infrastructure, instantly swung away from the stage and locked directly onto me. I sat perfectly still at table 1, my fingers lightly resting against the cool, condensation-covered stem of my wine glass, my face remaining an absolute, unbothered mirror of clinical professionalism. To the gasping crowd, my complete lack of movement must have looked like the paralyzing shock of a guilty criminal who had just been publicly unmasked at a high society event. Evelyn's lips twitched into a subtle, self-satisfied smirk that signaled she believed she had just executed a flawless, surgical public execution from which I could never possibly recover. For 10 long years, I watched this family open its arms to a child who repaid our generosity with nothing but cold, calculating deception, Evelyn continued, her voice amplified to a booming, dramatic pitch. While my late husband, Andrew Sterling, was lying on his deathbed fighting for his life, this monster was quietly forging corporate transfer deeds and stealing the proprietary international shipping grids. She pointed her gloved finger directly down at me, her chest heaving with a calculated, righteous anger that was entirely designed to feed the salacious appetite of the watching press cameras. She stripped my innocent Tiffany of her rightful inheritance, and tonight, on my 55th birthday, I am officially demanding that the board strip her of her stolen titles and launch a full criminal investigation. A collective shockwave of frantic whispering rippled through the front rows of the elite crowd, several prominent hedge fund managers leaning inward to exchange tight, scandalous looks. Marcus Thorne, the oldest and most conservative board member of our multi-billion-dollar enterprise, frowned deeply, his eyes darting between Evelyn's theatrical display and my unmoving frame. I took a slow, deep breath, the subtle aroma of expensive white truffles and roasted duck suddenly feeling distant as a profound, icy calm washed over my entire chest. What my brilliant, arrogant stepmother completely failed to comprehend, blinded by her own monstrous ego and a decade of superficial greed, was that her public attack was an absolute illusion. She believed she had caught me entirely off guard at her lavish birthday celebration, weaponizing the presence of our company's highest institutional investors to force a public surrender. She truly believed that because she had spent 10 years playing the role of the devoted, grieving widow, she could rewrite the financial architecture of the empire my father and I had built. My father, Andrew Sterling, had founded this global logistics and infrastructure juggernaut 40 years ago in a dusty, rented warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. He was a man of immense honor and relentless work ethic, but his greatest vulnerability had always been his profound, blinding loneliness after my biological mother passed away. 10 years ago, Evelyn had slithered into his life like a polished, high-society predator, wearing a mask of southern charm and domestic devotion that completely concealed her parasitic intentions. She brought along her spoiled, entitled daughter, Tiffany, and together they immediately began treating our family name as an unlimited, multi-million-dollar corporate credit card. While Tiffany was flying on our corporate private jets to attend high fashion shows in Paris and Milan, I was working 18-hour days in the dark, humming depths of our global transit hubs. I learned the business from the absolute bedrock up, mastering forensic accounting, international maritime law, and the complex cryptographic systems that regulated our automated shipping matrices. My father recognized my absolute devotion, and as his health slowly began to fail him under the crushing weight of a terminal respiratory illness, he pulled me closer into the shadows of leadership. Evelyn had tried everything in her power to isolate him during his final 6 months, systematically firing our loyal household staff and replacing them with her own paid, untrustworthy lackeys. She barred me from entering the family estate for weeks at a time, claiming that my father was too weak to receive visitors, while she quietly brought in corrupt estate lawyers to draft a fraudulent, secondary will. She wanted the entirety of the multi-billion-dollar corporate stock transferred to Tiffany, leaving me with nothing but a worthless, symbolic minority stake that could be easily dissolved by the board. What Evelyn's greed-blinded mind completely failed to realize was that my father was far sharper than she ever gave him credit for, and he knew exactly what kind of monster he had married. 2 months before his peaceful passing, my father had crawled out of his medical bed in the dead of night, utilizing a secure, encrypted satellite video link I had established for him. He wept openly as he apologized for bringing Evelyn into our lives, confessing that he had discovered she was systematically draining our domestic corporate accounts to fund a hidden offshore entity. "Lana, my beautiful, brilliant architect," he had whispered, his voice weak but vibrating with an absolute, unyielding paternal pride. "They think they are going to inherit a kingdom, but they don't realize that you are the one who actually holds the keys to the entire world we built." Together, during those quiet, midnight digital sessions, my father and I executed a massive, completely legal and entirely secret corporate asset clawback strategy. We utilized an ironclad, grandmothered statutory corporate code embedded deep within the original founding charter of Sterling Global Infrastructure from 1986. We didn't alter his primary public will, knowing that doing so would trigger an immediate, aggressive legal challenge from Evelyn's high-priced corporate attorneys. Instead, we quietly, systematically transferred the exclusive intellectual property patents, the automated transit encryption matrices, and the physical land deeds of our primary shipping ports into an independent holding firm. That anonymous holding firm, registered in Delaware under the name Aegis Legacy Trust, was placed under my absolute, unconditional, and irrevocable personal control. Sterling Global Infrastructure did not actually own the technological lifeline that allowed its cargo ships and freight trains to cross international borders. They merely leased it from my private trust. By standing atop that marble staircase and publicly terminating my corporate authority in front of the board of directors, Evelyn had unwittingly pulled the pin on her own financial grenade. I stood up slowly from table 1, smoothing the front of my tailored midnight black tuxedo suit with a deliberate, unhurried grace that caught the whispering crowd entirely off guard. The heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom seemed to magnify the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the polished hardwood floor as I walked toward the stage. I carried a sleek, matte black leather portfolio beneath my arm, my eyes locking directly onto Evelyn's face as her triumphant smile began to falter ever so slightly under my freezing gaze. "Lana, do not step onto the stage. Security has already been instructed to escort you out of the building," Tiffany hissed through griced teeth as I approached the stairs. Her fragile, tearful act instantly vanished, replaced by the ugly, entitled malice she had inherited directly from her mother as she tried to block the top of the staircase. I ignored her completely, walking straight past her trembling frame until I stood at the auxiliary microphone podium on the right side of the main presentation stage. Directly behind the stage hung a massive, floor-to-ceiling framed portrait of my late father, Andrew Sterling, his painted eyes looking down over the ballroom with a powerful, timeless dignity. "Evelyn, I must thank you for organizing such a magnificent, highly publicized gathering of our company's primary stakeholders and international investors tonight," I began, my voice smooth as silk. My baritone clarity cut through the state-of-the-art audio system effortlessly, entirely devoid of the panicked defensiveness Evelyn had so desperately expected to hear. Because it saves my legal team the immense logistical trouble of scheduling individual emergency meetings to explain the permanent structural restructuring of this empire. Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh into her microphone, though her ice-blue eyes darted anxiously toward Marcus Thorne, who was now standing up from his table. Do not attempt to hide behind your clinical corporate jargon, Lana. The board has seen the forged transfer deeds you pushed through during my husband's final days. Evelyn shouted back. You are a fraudulent thief, and you have exactly 5 minutes to sign over the control of the primary logistics matrix to Tiffany before the police arrive to place you in handcuffs. I offered her a serene, almost pitying smile, slowly unzipping my black leather portfolio and producing 3 thick, crisp documents stamped with the official gold seal of the Federal Maritime Commission. I have not forged a single document in my entire life, Evelyn, but I am holding the certified, digitally verified public archives of Aegis Legacy Trust, I announced clearly. 10 years ago, when you married my father, you signed a comprehensive, ironclad prenuptial agreement that explicitly barred you from ever acquiring a single share of founding stock. To bypass that restriction, you and your attorneys spent the last 6 months drafting a secondary, fraudulent corporate succession will, which you intended to present to the board tomorrow morning. Evelyn's face instantly lost a fraction of its theatrical color, her gloved hand tightening around her microphone so hard that a sharp, metallic feedback ring echoed through the ballroom speakers. That is a completely baseless lie. My husband loved me. He wanted my daughter to lead his legacy, she stammered, her voice rising to a frantic, defensive pitch. My father loved his company, Evelyn, and he loved me enough to ensure that his life's work would never be used to finance your offshore gambling debts and Tiffany's luxury villas, I countered coldly. I slid the first crisp document across the presenter's podium, the high-definition document camera instantly projecting the text onto the massive digital screens behind the stage. The text displayed the official corporate registry of Aegis Legacy Trust, revealing that 100% of the proprietary tracking code and shipping software belonged exclusively to me. As of precisely midnight last night, the temporary leasing agreement between Sterling Global and Aegis Legacy Trust has officially expired due to a material breach of fiduciary duty by the estate executors, I said. By attempting to freeze my operational access and launch a fraudulent takeover, you have automatically triggered an immediate, unconditional hard revocation of all global shipping permits. The sudden, horrified gasps of 100 guests shattered the ambient warmth of the ballroom, the sound of dropping silver forks clattering against porcelain plates echoing like small explosions. Marcus Thorne rushed toward the stage, his face flushed a violent shade of crimson as he grabbed the edge of the presenter's podium, his eyes scanning the projected legal text with absolute terror. Lana, what are you saying? Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with a sudden, palpable panic that carried across the nearest rows of high society investors. Are you telling me that our 32 commercial transport cargo vessels currently crossing the Atlantic Ocean do not possess active digital customs clearance codes? Yes, Marcus, that is exactly what I am saying, I replied smoothly, looking down at the stunned board member with an unwavering, absolute confidence. Without my private cryptographic signatures, every single one of those vessels will be denied entry at the ports of Rotterdam, New York, and Singapore by tomorrow morning. Furthermore, because Evelyn has spent the last 2 hours publicly claiming that my operational management is fraudulent, I have officially transferred the master service agreements to a new entity. Nexus Infrastructure Group, a private corporation founded by my late father and myself, has just absorbed 90% of our primary international client portfolios as of 10 minutes ago. Tiffany let out a loud, ungraceful shriek of pure panic, her silk handkerchief slipping from her fingers as she turned to look at her mother with a pale, sweating face. Mom, do something. Tell her she can't do this. What is happening to our stock? Tiffany screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate, childish tantrum in front of the entire city elite. Evelyn looked as if she had been struck by a physical bolt of lightning, her proud, arrogant posture completely collapsing as a cold sweat began to break through her heavy evening makeup. She dropped her microphone onto the marble stairs with a loud, deafening thud that vibrated through the ballroom speakers, her hands shaking violently as she frantically pulled out her smartphone. The digital corporate data feeds on her screen were already reflecting the catastrophic news, showing a historic, vertical plunge in the pre-market valuation of Sterling Global stock. The shares were plummeting into the absolute pennies, losing over $400 million in market capitalization within a matter of minutes as international investors panicked and dumped their holdings. Several prominent venture capitalists at Table 1 stood up in unison, their faces hardening into expressions of profound, unmitigated fury as they turned their backs on Evelyn. "This is an absolute disaster, Evelyn. You told us you had full control of the succession paperwork," a major institutional shareholder roared from the center of the ballroom. "You dragged us to this ridiculous birthday party to witness a public execution, and you've just bankrupted the entire regional logistics network with your petty, uneducated greed." Evelyn staggered backward against the gold leaf railing of the staircase, her breath caught in her throat like a physical obstruction as she looked down at the sea of disgusted faces staring up at her. The high society peers who had spent the last 2 hours kissing her ring and offering her expensive birthday wishes were now looking at her with the total, devastating contempt reserved for an exposed parasite. I picked up my leather portfolio, stepping away from the podium and turning around to look at the massive painted portrait of my father one final time. In the warm glow of the stage lights, his painted eyes seemed to shine with a brilliant, victorious satisfaction, as if he were finally resting in an absolute, undisturbed peace. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Evelyn," I said softly, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that easily cut through the chaotic shouting of the ruined ballroom. "My corporate legal team and the county sheriff will be arriving at the family estate at precisely 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to execute a formal asset foreclosure and eviction notice. Since the mansion is legally owned by the corporate infrastructure firm, and that firm is now entering emergency liquidation under my new trust, you have exactly 12 hours to clear your things from my property." I walked down the marble steps, my head held high, my posture radiating the immense, unyielding confidence of the true, undisputed heir of the Sterling legacy. The crowd of billionaire investors and city officials parted before me like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with a deep, reverent awe as I walked smoothly toward the grand exit doors. Evelyn and Tiffany were left entirely alone atop that sweeping staircase, their desperate, hysterical screams for a legal recess fading into a distant, insignificant murmur behind me. The very next morning, the fallout from the grand birthday gala swept through the global financial sector like an unmitigated, Category 5 legal hurricane. Sterling Global Infrastructure was plunged into immediate, total operational paralysis as their cargo ships were officially quarantined outside international ports, unable to legally clear customs without my codes. The commercial banks, utterly terrified by the sudden, complete disappearance of the company's core intellectual property patents, immediately froze all of Evelyn's personal credit lines and corporate accounts. The board of directors officially executed an emergency vote of no confidence, removing Evelyn from the estate execution committee and launching a massive, multi-million-dollar shareholder lawsuit for gross negligence and corporate asset dissipation. Evelyn and Tiffany were forced to pack their expensive designer clothing into cheap cardboard boxes, stepping out onto the concrete driveway of the grand family mansion under the watchful eyes of the county sheriff. Evelyn's private luxury vehicles, her diamond-encrusted jewelry collections, and even her hidden offshore funds were systematically seized by federal regulatory commissions to satisfy the immense debts of her failed corporate coup. She was left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of unpayable legal fees, a completely ruined reputation, and the looming reality of a federal criminal fraud indictment that would likely carry a multi-year prison sentence. Tiffany's high-fashion international lifestyle completely evaporated overnight, her wealthy socialite friends ghosting her profiles completely the moment her family name became synonymous with corporate bankruptcy. 2 months later, I sat at the head of a gorgeous, sunlit conference table inside the brand-new downtown headquarters of Nexus Infrastructure Group. The space was a masterclass in modern, quiet luxury, filled with natural oak wood, towering green plants, and a vibrant, collaborative energy that was completely free from the toxic shadows of my childhood. Marcus Thorne, who had resigned from the old ruined board to join my new enterprise as our senior compliance director, quietly pushed a thick leather binder across the table toward me. The federal maritime licenses have been fully transitioned to the Nexus grid, Ms. Sterling, and our automated transit hubs are currently operating at a historic 110% capacity, Marcus said, his voice laced with an absolute, genuine respect. Furthermore, the asset liquidation firm just finalized the purchase deed for your father's original warehouse infrastructure. It is officially back under your personal name. I picked up my fountain pen, smoothly signing the final authorization page before leaning back in my executive chair to look out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Down below in the international harbor, a massive fleet of clean, modern cargo vessels moved with perfect, mathematical precision, their hulls cutting through the deep blue water of the open ocean. I had honored my father's legacy and our shared life's work not by allowing myself to be crushed by a malicious stepmother's entitlement, but by having the brilliant, strategic foresight to know my own immense worth. I closed the folder, turned toward my elite operational team with a warm, peaceful smile, and prepared to lead my company into a flawless, limitless, and completely triumphant tomorrow.